So for this session, we're going to talk real quick about things that you can keep in mind when you're putting together your resume in terms of like wording things or, you know, phrasing the data science things. I'm more specifically going to talk about like the technical projects section. And then after that, I'll talk about some things to keep in mind when making your GitHub look presentable. So to start off, this is a resume template. I believe this may or may not be the same one that you get from career services. If not, it should be quite similar. You can see here, and this is also not like, what's the word? It's not a rigid template. You can definitely play around with the sections that you want to have. Like for me, I actually put my employment above my technical projects. I actually don't have a technical skills section because I weave that into my project descriptions. I also don't like to write like these short blurbs about myself, so I don't have that. But yeah, these things are all very subjective and up to you. Let me see. I think I should pull maybe something of mine up as a partial example. Give me a quick second. So when you're talking about your technical projects, some key phrases to keep in mind that I've heard from employers and also people who are in the job search that have been helpful and things that people talk about during interviews is talk about the improvements that you've made. That's one of the reasons why I said that, you know, it's sometimes I like to give myself like a really crappy baseline so I can say like there's a big percentage change in like the, I don't know, the accuracy score from baseline to final model. So because of that, I use that number. And again, depending on what the numbers are, you can phrase them in different ways. Like as an example, one of my projects was a multi-class project and I had like 5 classes and I was trying to classify that. So my baseline using the dummy classifier was a 20% accuracy. And then when I got that up to like an 80%, that was a 300% increase. So you can play around with numbers like that. I know like if you read into the numbers, you figure out that it's actually not that impressive, but having those numbers there. Also, I mean, people are drawn to those big numbers, I think. Also, yeah, whenever possible, quantify what you're doing. If you work with like a particularly large data set, say that, you know, you trained your data on like maybe like a 1 million row, 1 million training points or data points or something like that, depending on like the data type that you have. It could be like, I guess it doesn't really matter if it was like a JSON or CSV, but you can weave in those numbers as much as possible to quantify what it is that you did. So in terms of like numbers, I would say, yeah, talk about your results. And then also your improvement, and then just try and talk about the scale of what you're doing. You're trying to emphasize the scale of what you're doing. So one example of something that I had was in that project that I was talking about. It was actually a image classification project with 5 classes. I said, as one of the lines, I said like improved accuracy over 200% from a baseline of 20% by applying blah, blah, blah. So just using numbers as much as possible to quantify what you were doing is going to be helpful. So besides numbers, also talk about the technologies that you used. So for example, if with that same example that I just said, it was a convolutional neural network method. So I would say like by applying a convolutional network, if I did like transfer learning, I would incorporate that somewhere. So as much as possible, try and weave in all the different technologies you used. If you trained a specific classification model, name that model. If you want to talk about the fact that you train multiple models, you can talk about that as well. Something that I'm more than happy to do is if you want to run some of those phrases by me, if you want to like send me your like lines of what you're putting in your resume for me to see if that makes sense or if there's a way to phrase it more impressively, feel free to send those over and let me know. I'm more than happy to do so. So yeah, in terms of projects, that's really all to think about. Just really think about all of the different components of your project. What is the most impressive? What are the things that you want to highlight to them? good thing to think about is if you have different projects, you want to highlight different things. So let's say you had 2 out of your 3 projects were classification projects. You don't need to write that you did classification for both. You can maybe highlight something else in one of the projects, just as an example. In terms of education, I've gotten a few questions about how to phrase your Flatiron School education in your resume. I personally don't think that you have to put too much there. I think most people just have like one line under education saying like Flatiron School full-time online data science bootcamp, something along those lines. I don't think like the exact wording matters that much. I know after you graduate, you will get like a certificate. So maybe you match that wording to whatever it is on your certificate. So yeah, something that looks just like this. I'm not sure if the online program also calls it immersive. So, but again, I don't think the semantics matter too much here. But yeah, I think those are the main things that are going to be like what I can speak to versus a career coach. I think the career coach can help you a lot more with all of the other aspects, like your previous employment and stuff like that. But does anyone have any like questions or thoughts on putting together your resume?
Hey, Ish, I have a question. If you're in if like a project is in process right now, do you just put it in as if it's done already, or is there any way to like word that, I guess?
That's a good question. So I know y'all are now in the process of like halfway through your capstone and then you're planning to send these out. It really depends on like when you're expecting to hear back, right? Like if you're at a part in your project where let's say you only have your MVP, and if you know that in the next few days you're gonna like complete whatever, then sure, I would put that in your resume as well. I wouldn't put something that is not gonna be attainable in like the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
That's my take. I don't know if the career coaches have like a different take on that, but that's my opinion. Because you don't want someone to like contact you about your project and see something completely different.
Yeah.
But yeah, as long as you can in the near future attain whatever it is that you're writing out, I think that's fine.
Cool.
Yeah.
Hey, should you ever include any sort of visuals with your resume, or should you save all of that for like your online portfolio?
In my experience, because I've always been in like a kind of technical field, I never put visuals on my resume. I do know that software engineering, sometimes they like will design their resume slightly differently. I can't really speak much to that and like whether that will help or hinder data science job searches. So I think that's a better question for a career coach. But I mean, I, for one, think that it will make your resume stand out if you do it well. In terms, you mean by like design, like your resume design, like rather than having just this like plain template, or do you mean like adding actual like, I don't know, potential like charts or something?
Well, I guess I was thinking more about like charts that kind of correspond to maybe some of the projects you have listed there. Like if you want to show the percentage increase and you actually have a visual. I mean the type of interviews I've done before in my previous life, visuals were good. So I just didn't know if that was standard in this industry or
okay,
needed or not.
To my knowledge, no. Again, career coaches would know better. To my knowledge, if you're able to write about, you know, your results, if you're able to like just write your results here, that's good enough. Also, one thing that I find helpful is I actually hyperlink my GitHub here, which if you like do it on Google Docs, for example, and you save it as a PDF, the hyperlinks will actually stay on the PDF. So that if you're sending your PDF to someone, they can actually click and find your GitHub. So I think because of that, I've never thought to put any of my charts on my resume, but yeah, career coaches would know better about that. I personally have not seen many examples, so I don't think that it is the majority of resumes, but yeah, that's just based on what I've seen.
Okay, thank you.
Any suggestions on number of projects to include?
The standard is 3. So I remember, because I had started sending my resume out before I finished my capstone, so I actually did my like phase 2, 3, 4. So I had like I did an image classification project for phase 4. I had like I had an NLP classification in phase 3 and a regression in phase 2. So I actually had those. And then when I finished my capstone, I got rid of the regression and put my capstone there. So I think the standard is 3. I honestly think that that is also due to space constraint on one page. Oh, something else is that like, I know some fields are okay with like more than 1 page of a resume, but to my knowledge, and this is also what I remember my career coach telling me, is that resumes should be within a page, but feel free to double check with your career coach on this as well. But yeah, due to like space constraints, because you want to also talk about an equal amount about your past experience and how that could potentially lend to your future data science job. I think, yeah, a page will have enough for three previous jobs and then 3 projects. Again, I think it is also somewhat subjective. It's not like someone will see a resume and say, oh my gosh, there's 4 projects here, we're not going to look at this. So yeah, definitely 3 is the standard to my knowledge, but definitely subjective. Also, you can play around with the margins on the page so that you can write more about either your past positions or about your projects. But yeah.
Excuse me, Ish, for employment history, should we include every history we have or just the relevant one to data science?
I think the more relevant, the better. I know some people have like, will do like their last 3. Me, for example, before this job, I didn't work at a job for more than 6 months at a time. And so therefore I had like a lot of like small jobs, and not everyone was like particularly like technical or I don't know, analytical. So I did end up picking and choosing which ones I wanted to highlight. I ended up like throwing in a job that I had in like 2016 because that one ended up being more relevant than some of like my intermediate jobs in between. So that's what I did. I don't know. I know some people say that like people will see the dates of employment and be like, what happened in between these dates? I don't know if that's true. I just felt like it was better to have that information there versus like a job that was less related to data science. I do think that is also subjective. And I think if you're trying to decide between like, let's say like for the 3rd job on your resume, if you're trying to decide, should I put this one or another one? I think that's a good question to ask your career coach. Feel free to get my opinion if you'd like, although I don't know how much more value I can add there. But yeah, I think you definitely don't have to put all your prior employment. That can be found on your LinkedIn, which they will also have you hyperlink over here. So yeah, I don't think you have to do all your jobs for sure. Usually 3 to my knowledge. Also, this is because of the template, but yeah. Anything else? Cool. In terms of like other things that I remember my career coach telling me that would be like cool to include in your resume. If you know any other coding languages that weren't covered in the course, like for example, I technically know a little bit of JavaScript from working with software engineering. I just threw that in like an additional skills section. If you speak another language, that apparently is also potentially valuable. That's what my career coach told me. So I have that listed there too. And something that I found here, let me just switch my share to like part of my resume, because I guess it doesn't really matter, but let me show you all this. So this is my resume. This is what I mean by like a skills section. And here I basically listed anything that wasn't listed within my project. Or if there's something that, you know, I figured would come up in like a keyword search, I just threw that in there because I know some people have like I think like HR places, I've heard they have this technology where they will scan your PDF for like specific keywords and filter resumes using that. So anything that I thought was important, I put here. I also am not super good at AWS, but I've used it before. And so I threw it there. And I feel like that is something that is okay to do as well. But yeah, this is what I was talking about before with like using like a baseline number. And yeah, this is an old resume too. Just in case anyone wants to, I don't know. But yeah, does anyone have any further questions about putting together your resume? I know, like, I think the first career coaching meeting you guys will have after the intro will be the resume meeting, or one of the first few, yeah. So yeah, if any of you want to get my take on like phrasing certain things, let me know. But cool, I do not want to have my resume on the screen for so long. But yeah, any other resume questions? Because next I want to talk about is your GitHub page. All right, so for GitHub pages, I'm going to use, I'll just use my GitHub page as an example, but know that my GitHub page is not perfect. So we'll start with your profile page. So your profile page, there's a couple of things to talk about. First, you should pin your top projects. And GitHub lets you pin 3 top projects. Oh, sorry, not 3, 6 top projects. I have 6 here. And then you can actually like drag and drop based on the order you want them to come up. This is also a good opportunity to change the titles of your repos. So I know some of you have like mod or like phase 3 project as a title. So it's a good idea to change those because you don't want people to see that it is like a whatever. Yeah, so you can see here, it used to be called like mod 2 project. Also, if the repo was not created by you, if it's created by like your project partner, you can clone, not clone, but you can fork the repo so it ends up being on your own, under your own username. And then yeah, you pin your 6 projects. You can choose whatever order you want. I need to be better at this, but putting in like a description that is meaningful for your project will also help. I was also told by my career coach that I should change my profile picture to something more professional, but I never got around to doing that. But I don't know. Niagara Falls, by the way. That was like the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. So yeah, with this page, your pin projects I think are important. I know that if you like fork a lot of the repositories, you end up with a lot. Like if you fork them off Canvas, I know some people do that. That's why I have 600. That's not a thing that people look at. In your GitHub is a good idea to link your LinkedIn, and location I think now matters a lot less. The next thing I want to talk about is contributions. So you can see that I mainly do my contributions sporadically on weekdays. And if you're like committing on GitHub every day, this will look more green. So basically, the more green you have, the more active of a coder you look like. And so a contribution basically happens whenever you make a commit and whenever you push a commit up to GitHub. And so your career coaches will tell you too that you should be committing something as much as possible, at least once a week. I think they say like, I think there's a number of like 5 commits per week, but I forget if that's still one of their guidelines. But the more you have going on your commits, the more active it looks like you are as a coder. So because of that, something that I did was I was doing like little coding challenges for a while every day. This was like last year at some point, and then every day I would just like update my Jupyter notebook with like a new solution to a new problem, and that just will immediately count as a commit. So that's like an easy thing to do. Just like every day I just solve a few problems on like my Jupyter notebook and upload it to a repo. Another thing that actually comes in handy, I forget if I talked about this before, but GitHub issues also count as contributions. So GitHub issues are something that's pretty neat, I think. For example, let's say this is one of my projects. where did it go? Hold on, issues. But this is all issues. Okay, let me see if I can find the issues for here, because I know they have recently changed all the tabs. Is it under actions? Oh, under projects. Oh, there we go. Organize your issues. Oh, okay. They've changed it to be like more like a board. But let's say you have like one of your past projects, and now that we've learned a lot more things since like phase 1 or phase 2, you can potentially add issues to your project. So I guess now they have this. It used to be the case that you can just like take notes of what issues you have, but I guess now you can just create a project. Maybe like it's basically within a repo, what is it that you want to work on? And if you just write about what you want to work on, it actually counts as a contribution. So let's say I put here, add visualizations, and then description, which is optional. Maybe I say like add scatter plot to show, I don't know, patterns. Save that. And then I guess they make it like a Trello board if anyone has dealt with that. This is new, honestly. So you do that, and then you add an issue. I think that might count as something. But basically, after you have issues, there's an issues tab here, and you can see that these are ones that I've had in the past. So for example, for this one, I put an issue just to say that I wanted to create a front end. And this actually does count as a contribution. Yeah, there used to be an issues tab. I'm not sure if you all have this because I know this is an older repo, but yeah, if you have this issues tab, it becomes a lot easier because everything that you do in the issues tab will count as contributions. And it'll just make you look like a more active coder or like an active user. So yeah. Something that's a little bit less important that I know some of my cohorts did was they just followed each other on GitHub. Just so you look like you have more of a following. That's something that you all can choose to do. I don't think it matters too much, but it's a fun community. You get like a feed of the people that you follow. But yeah, I don't think that's as big of a deal. Before I talk about like individual project and like how like my tips on like setting those up, does anyone have any thoughts on like the overall like profile page of a GitHub repo of your GitHub profile? All right, so within each project, and let me just think which is my cleanest one. I think probably this one. All right, for your specific project, a couple like easy things to do is clean up your files. So for example, some of you might have, if you don't have this in your gitignore, some of you might have like the pi cache or like the IPYNB checkpoints or like a DS store, any of those like meaningless files you can get rid of. Easiest way to get rid of them, just add them into the gitignore. So you can see here in the gitignore, I have things that will not get pushed up to GitHub. Basically, that will just make your file architecture just be cleaner. So that's like a really easy thing to do. It also counts as a commit. Also, one thing that some people do look at is the number of commits in your project. So I know some of you did all your projects locally and then uploaded everything at once, but having a commit history is helpful just so like people can see that you are, you know, consistently reiterating on something. So having like a good number of commits per project is also something that's good to have. Honestly, you can really increase the number of commits that you have by just like changing little things at a time. But people, at least in the software engineering field, I know that they care about the number of commits more. Data science, I'm not as sure, but good to have that number higher just because. One other thing on the topic of commits is be careful about your commit messages. I've been called out multiple times about having bad commit messages. I think in this one, I just got like really, really frustrated and I started writing just bad commit messages and I didn't realize that they would stay here, I guess. And so be very careful about your commit messages. You want them to be meaningful. I think I mentioned this when we first started our first project, but always try to have as meaningful commit messages as possible and try not to sound frustrated, I guess. That I have been called out in an interview about this. But I guess you can, I don't know, I twisted it to make it seem like I was a carefree, laid back person. But I don't know, it's up to you all. Also, something else to remember to include is if you have your presentation for a project, do include that as part of your repo. If you're including it as part of your repo and you really want people to see it, put that in your README, saying like, just say something about like, oh, slides to project presentation here, and then you can hyperlink to a specific file in your project. So you can actually hyperlink it to the PDF that you're uploading. So you can have that. I don't think I have, yeah, we used to not have to do presentations, so I don't have many of those. But I do think some of your presentations add on to what you have in your notebooks. So I know like some of your notebooks don't have like the full business case or your full conclusion. Having that in your presentation where someone can like refer to would be great. Let's see. That's all I have to say about like the project repo itself. Anyone have any questions about that? I'm going to get into README and I'm going to talk about README next, like specific what people want to see in a README. But yeah, does anyone have any questions on like the overall project page?
Yes, I have a question. Is there any way that we can push our commits without closing our Jupyter notebooks?
Push our, that's actually dangerous to do. So if I know, I'm not sure if you all have come across this, but sometimes when you push your commits and your Jupyter notebook is still open, the version of the Jupyter notebook that's on GitHub is an incomplete version of a Jupyter notebook because something is still being executed, especially if something is still being executed and you try and push it up. If someone else pulls down that version of the notebook, it could be corrupted. So typically I say don't do that. I haven't found like a workaround for that. I know it's kind of annoying that you have to like close everything out and reopen and rerun everything again.
Yes, exactly. So why should we commit everything every day? So why is it important to have those table green all the time?
That really is just like another thing to show that you are working on stuff, honestly. If you can like talk about that or show that you are working on stuff elsewhere, or like if you have another way to show that, then sure. But I know that I've heard from people. One of my students said that it was brought up in an interview that like you have no green in the past 6 months. I guess that's an extreme case of like you have nothing at all versus you have some stuff. But yeah, that I remember stuck with me, and I was like, okay, I gotta make sure to always have some green on my bar. So I guess you don't have to do it every day, because even I don't do it every day. And also I'm lucky because I upload stuff to your repos like a couple of times a week, so there's always stuff there. But yeah, it is arguable that you don't have to commit every day. It's just, yeah, think of it as a suggestion. But yeah, I agree with you. It is very, very annoying, especially if you have a big project with a lot of, and when your cells take a long time to run, it might not be worth it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so next thing I wanted to talk about is just some overall things about your READMEs. I remember when I was graduating and I looked back at my old READMEs, I hated all of my READMEs. And so some things to consider, because the README is very subjective. And I think that in our reviews, I've told some of you that like, you know, if your README is really short or if it's very, very long, it honestly is up to you and how you want to come across. So I think the most important thing that you can keep in mind with a README is clarity. I mentioned this before as well, but in speaking to like a recruiter for actually a company that recruits from Flatiron School, he says that he doesn't look at a person's project page. On average, he looks at a project page for about 15 seconds to see whether it's worth looking more into. So because of that, you want to make your project stand out or seem interesting as quickly as possible. I will say my READMEs are not the best. I think I have like a pretty standard format of, you know, all these different sections, like outlining what I did, some of my slides, these are from my slides, and then putting like some conclusion at the end. I've also seen READMEs where they are very, very in-depth, talking and like bolding text, a lot of hyperlinks to resources, very, very subjective again. So depends on what you're comfortable with putting out there. But yeah, I think as long as you can focus on clarity, I think if you have that as like your number one thing when preparing a README, that's good. If you want to get like my take on your READMEs, and I think like I'm pretty open-minded when it comes to reading all of your READMEs. So in like all of these project reviews, I don't usually have too many things to say about READMEs, but if you want to say like, all right, is this part clear to a reader? Let me know, I'm more than happy to look over. So from that, oh yeah, I love that meme. I swear I was trying to be funny because I did this project about Reddit and I Googled naive Bayes memes and this was one of the first ones that came up. So yeah, I do not take credit for it. I just think it was like very, very specific and also very like relevant. It was super relevant. But anyways, let's see. In terms of your READMEs, things that will help with clarity, really make use of markdown formatting. And some of you have even gone a step further and use like HTML formatting. So you can like, you know, position your images better, resize your images better. I know resizing images is that line of code I've sent to a lot of you because by default, the images will like take up the entire width or whatever the original size of the image was. So make use of the formatting as much as possible. I'm a very big fan of like bolding and formatting text so things are clearer. But yeah, I also am not a big writer anyway, so I try to say as little as possible. But yeah, making use of markdown formatting will make things a lot clearer. I've also seen if you have like a longer README, you can actually hyperlink these different sections. So you see how like when I hover over here, there's a specific URL, like this says like feature engineering. You can actually have like a table of contents at the top of your README that when you like click a specific part, it'll hyperlink to like a specific section. If you know what I mean by that, like it'll automatically like scroll down to a specific section. I've seen that, then I think it's cool. I haven't implemented it myself because my READMEs are never long enough. In terms of like EDA graphs, I know some of you like to put EDA graphs on your markdowns, on your READMEs. And I think it's gotten a lot better with the last couple of projects, but make sure that you only put relevant ones that like people will care about, in a similar vein as like thinking about what EDA to put on your presentation. Some things that we don't want and to look out for. First, Jupyter Notebook screenshots are typically not very liked. If you have like a screenshot of like your code in your README, typically people don't like to see that. That's what I've heard from a couple of recruiters, so don't do that. Also, hold on, I have like a bunch of notes written down, which is what I'm looking at. Oh, also, actually, before I get into that, possible things that you could highlight in a README that could be impressive. First of all, if you had worked on your project with a partner, I did not do that here, but I think I have that in another project. It's always good to like give kudos to your project partner. I think I have that here maybe. Okay, never mind. But yeah, good to say that, oh, you worked on this with who? Maybe I had that on this one. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So you can do that. Also, if you like did any sort of data synthesis, so like here, for example, I use 2 different APIs and I talk about how I put them together. Talk about that because data synthesis is like a very, very underrated part of data science. If you created a data pipeline, there's like the words creating data pipeline is something that you should make stand out. If you have a dashboard or if you make a front end, it's a good idea to link to it. So this one, I don't have one, but I know this one I actually linked to a front end here. This is not like a big project, so I don't have a lot there. But yeah, if you have any like external links from your project, you can do that too. And then, yeah, any questions about like specific project pages? Because next I want to go more in depth to talk about your notebooks on GitHub. Cool. So notebooks on GitHub, some of you have like during your project reviews, you'll walk me through like the GitHub version of your notebook. I haven't been nitpicky about this at all, just because for my purposes and seeing your project review, this matters less to me. But things to think about when you're uploading your notebook onto GitHub, sometimes people do click and look through them. So you want your notebook to be as clean as possible. And that's also why I say that it's good to, have some narrative going on, like write your thought processes out in markdown cells. But on the flip side, there's some things that you don't want to have. So for example, I know a lot of you are now working with APIs, and sometimes with APIs, you have like a really long output. And if you've noticed on GitHub, if you have like a very, very long output, the whole thing will print out, and then this will take forever to scroll through. I don't have an example because I think I've cleaned most of those up. But yeah, if you ever have like a very long text output, like for example, you're printing like a JSON with 1,000 results, you don't want that to turn up on GitHub because people will mostly be scrolling through that. So just be careful about what you're printing. You don't need your every like df.head to be printed out. You maybe only need like a couple at a few intermediate points. Yeah. Also, blocks of uncommented code. By uncommented, I just mean like, let's say something like this. I guess, well, this counts as a comment. But if you just have like a bunch of cells of code with like no commentary, no comments, like the hashtag comments, you should not do that because people will be like just looking at your code and maybe not knowing what's going on. What else? So long inputs you don't want. Also, if there is, I don't know, I think one thing to think about when you're getting ready to put like your final Jupyter notebook up for people to see, just I would say just go in and like scroll through to see if there's anything that is showing up that you don't want to show up. So like, yeah, long outputs is one thing. Sometimes warnings, especially I know if you're doing like loops with warnings, a lot of this red stuff will come up. You can actually suppress warnings. If you just look up suppress warnings, Python, that will come up for you. It'll just have you ignore warnings. You can also set it to like print the first warning, but not future ones. So that's something you can think about too. Cause I know pandas, for example, if you do like an iloc, or if you don't do an iloc and you like are trying to overwrite something, the warning will come up. So you can suppress that. Yeah, this is the exact warning that comes up. But yeah, in terms of your notebook, I think when it gets onto GitHub, do a quick scroll through to make sure that it looks clean. The main thing, honestly, is the big outputs that like throw me off. So yeah, there's something showing up that isn't showing up. Sorry, if there's something that's showing up that you don't want to, get rid of it. One downside with Jupyter Notebooks is Plotly doesn't show up, unfortunately, because Plotly is interactive, so it actually doesn't render on Jupyter Notebook. So take that into account. I didn't really do much about it. Some people will actually take a screenshot of their graph and put it here, or link to the image in that is in their images folder, for example, especially if you use the image in your README. So that's also something you can do. But yeah, any questions about this? Awesome. I think that's all I had to say. I was taking a bunch of notes about this. So I think that's all I have to say about your GitHubs. Again, after graduation, I'm more than happy to like look through some of your pages. I can be extra nitpicky if you want me to, just let me know. And I'm happy to give feedback on like things to like adjust or change. But yeah, that's all I had to share for today. Does anyone have any like questions about anything? It doesn't have to be about this stuff, can still be about Capstones too.
Excuse me, Ish, since we covered everything in GitHub and all of the Capstone things, resume, everything, can you talk about a little bit about blogs?
Oh yeah, sure. So blogs, blogs on the one hand, it is a Flatiron School requirement to graduate. I understand. So I don't know how many of you fall in this subset of people, but I found myself thinking like, okay, I don't want, like at this point when I'm about to graduate, I'm looking back at like my first couple of blogs and I hate them. So once I graduated, I deleted them, and that's something that you can definitely do. So if you're unhappy with like your prior blogs that you wrote before you got into, before you start really thinking like a data scientist, feel free to get rid of those. You just have to have 4 published to graduate. And yeah, in terms of blogs, I think that it can be a useful tool to, especially something that you can talk about during interviews. But it really depends on if you enjoy it or not. I really found that like, I really struggled writing my first few blogs for this program, just because I like wasn't particularly interested in like, I don't know, like basic Python, I guess. But I found my groove writing about the stuff within data science that I cared about. So I actually like wrote, like my later blogs were a lot longer for one, and a lot more like meaningful and what's the word, like unique, I guess. Like I wrote like a blog about like the ethics of data science because that was really interesting to me. And then I kind of found my forte in like writing like more technical, like explaining things. So if anyone has seen like my recommendation system blogs, those were ones that I wrote like, I think not while I was a student, but as I was right, or a little bit after I graduated. So I feel like with those blogs, I could tell people that I was really passionate about, you know, algorithms and stuff, and I would have something to show for it. I think blogs can also be used to show your enthusiasm of the field. If you have like, it doesn't have to be like factual or technical. It can definitely be like opinion pieces that, or maybe even like walkthroughs of some of the projects that you're doing. But using blogs as like a thing to talk about, I think it really only makes sense if you're proud of the blogs that you're writing on. That's my opinion. But yeah, I don't know if you had any like specific questions about blogs that I can speak more about.
I want to know how they can be important, how they can be relevant to our future job or something like that.
Yeah, I think using it as a tool to talk about, to just like as evidence that you are passionate about the field enough to write about it. Because I think that's one thing that Flatiron School has unique versus other boot camps. At least like I remember when I was a student, like looking at different, before I was a student looking at different boot camps, Flatiron School is the only one that had a blog requirement, which I wasn't excited about, but I saw the value in like, you'll have another product that is not necessarily like a straight up coding project, to show your interest in the field, or also you can use it to show that you understand certain concepts in the field. Yeah, I think that's really what's most useful. I think career services will have you highlight your blogs too, or I think career services will have you write more blogs as you're going through the job search. I think it's important to, I think one thing that comes through in blogs is, are you able to communicate your technical, what you're doing technically to, I mean, just like in words. So yeah, I think blogs are important, but if you find that you cannot, if you find that you're not proud of what you're putting out there, I wouldn't use it as like a piece to talk about in an interview. But because I really like the blogs that I wrote towards the end of the program, I would always bring it up in an interview, just like casually saying, oh yeah, like I really enjoyed this algorithm, so therefore like I wrote something about it, got published on like Towards Data Science or something like that. But yeah, I understand that like blogs aren't for everybody. I definitely not a writer. And it was really only until like I figured out that I liked explaining things, which is where I found like my forte in writing blogs. But I understand that it's not for everybody. Cool. Anything else? All right then. Again, more than happy to look through like resume things, or like if you want me to like be more nitpicky at like your project materials, I'm more than happy to do so. So yeah, just let me know if anyone would like that. But if there's nothing else, I will let you all get back to your projects. Again, reach out to me on Slack if you're working through anything. And yeah, I will talk to you all tomorrow at the same time. All right. Bye, everybody. Have a good rest of your Thursday.
Thank you, you too. Bye.